Louis Armstrong's finger pressed against Dean's chest when backstage fell silent. "What's your pain, Dean?" Louis asked. His trumpet in his other hand, his eyes locked on Dean's, and Dean's mouth hung open because outside 600 people were waiting for him to take the stage. Wait, because the choice Dean made in the next 45 minutes would tear down the mask that had protected him for 20 years. And nobody, not even Louis, understood that Dean didn't know what this decision would cost him. The Newport Jazz Festival of 1966 wasn't supposed to be complicated. Dean had flown in on a Wednesday, checked into the Viking Hotel, rehearsed with the house band for 90 minutes, and planned to do what he always did: smile, sing, make the audience feel good, and fly back to Vegas by Friday morning. Simple, professional, safe. Louis Armstrong was headlining the same night, performing on the main stage. They'd crossed paths twice in the past decade, always cordial, always respectful. Louis had sent Dean a handwritten note in 1963, after seeing him perform in New York. "You got the voice and the timing, brother, but when you gonna let us see the real you?" Dean had laughed it off, filed the note away, never responded. But on Thursday afternoon, July 2nd, 1966, in the backstage area behind the main stage at Freebody Park, Louis Armstrong wasn't laughing. Dean had just finished his sound check. The Rhode Island summer heat made his tuxedo stick to his shoulders. He was heading back to his dressing room when he heard Louis' voice from the adjacent corridor. "Dean, need a word." Notice how Dean's first instinct was to turn it into a joke. That's what he always did. "Louis, if this is about the $50 I owe you from that poker game in '59, I got cash this time." He smiled. Easy. Practiced. Louis didn't smile back. He walked closer, and Dean could see something in his face he'd never seen before. Not anger. Something deeper. "This ain't about poker, brother. This about you." Dean's smile faltered for half a second, then returned. "Me. I'm just here to sing a few songs." "Louis, same as you." "No." Louis shook his head slowly. "Not the same as me at all." That's when Louis' hand came up, index finger extending, and pressed firmly against Dean's chest, right over his heart. "What's your pain, Dean?" Dean stepped back, but Louis stepped forward, keeping that finger in place. "I'm serious, brother. What's your pain?" "Because I got mine. I'm a black man in America. I know what it's like to smile on stage when the world outside those doors is different. I sing about wonderful worlds and people smile, but I know what I'm carrying. Nat King Cole, same thing. Sammy, same thing. We all carrying something heavy, and when we sing, people hear it. They feel it." Dean tried to deflect. "Louis, I don't know what you're an Italian immigrant's kid from Steubenville, Ohio." Louis cut him off. "Your real name ain't even Dean Martin. It's Dino Crocetti. Your father worked in a barber shop, couldn't speak English half the time. You grew up poor. You grew up different. You grew up knowing you didn't belong. That's pain, brother. That's the same pain I got, just wearing different clothes." Dean's jaw tightened. Nobody talked to him like this. Nobody pushed past the charm, past the persona, past the careful distance he kept between himself and everyone else. "Louis, my past is my business. Your past is in your voice. Dean, I can hear it. Every note you sing, I can hear that kid from Steubenville trying to prove he belongs. But you know what else I hear?" Louis leaned in closer. "I hear you hiding. I hear you putting up walls. I hear you singing, like you're afraid if people see the real you, they'll know you're still that immigrant kid who don't quite fit." Dean's face went cold. "You don't know what you're talking about. Then, prove me wrong." Louis stepped back, lowering his hand. "Tonight, on that stage, I dare you, Dean Martin. I dare you to stop hiding behind the smooth voice, and the jokes, and the everybody loves Dean routine. I dare you to sing one song, just one, where you let us see the pain. Let us see the immigrant kid. Let us see the real Dino Crocetti. The corridor was completely silent, except for the distant sound of a trumpet warming up in another room. Dean could feel his heart pounding. This was supposed to be a simple gig. Fly in, sing, fly out. Now Louis Armstrong, one of the greatest musicians who ever lived, was standing in front of him calling his entire career a lie. "And if I don't?" Dean asked quietly. Louis looked at him for a long moment. "Then your style is a lie, brother. And that voice of yours, beautiful as it is, ain't saying nothing true." He turned and started walking away, then stopped and looked back. "You go on at 8:30. I'll be watching from the wings. Let's see if you got the courage to be real." Remember how Dean always said his secret was never taking anything too seriously? That's what he told every interviewer, every journalist, every person who asked about his success. Don't take it too seriously. Have fun. Keep it light. But what Louis just did was call that philosophy a shield, and Dean didn't know how to respond. He stood in that corridor for 3 full minutes after Louis left. His hands were shaking. He told himself it was anger, but he knew better. It was fear. Fear that Louis was right. Fear that 20 years of carefully constructed persona was about to be challenged in front of 600 people. Dean's dressing room had a couch, a mirror, a bottle of scotch, and a telephone. He sat on the couch and stared at his reflection. The face looking back at him was Dean Martin, Vegas headliner, movie star, member of the Rat Pack, the man who made everything look easy. But behind that face, he could see something he'd spent 2 decades hiding. The kid who changed his name, changed his accent, changed everything about himself to escape being the barber's son who couldn't quite speak English correctly. His mind went back to 1940, standing outside the Rio Bamba nightclub in New York, 23 years old, looking at the marquee that read Dino Crocetti. The manager had pulled him aside after his first week. "Kid, you got talent, but the name's gotta go. Nobody's gonna pay top dollar to see Dino Crocetti. Sounds too ethnic. You want to make it in this business, you gotta be American. You gotta be smooth. You gotta be someone they want to be." Dean had changed his name the next day. Dino became Dean. Crocetti became Martin. And over the years, he'd changed everything else too. The way he talked, the way he moved, the way he held himself at a distance so nobody could see the seams, the places where the persona ended and the real person began. It had worked. God, it had worked so well. Dean Martin became one of the biggest stars in America. But Louis Armstrong just walked up to him and said, "I can see through it, and if I can, maybe everybody can." At 7:45, there was a knock on his dressing room door. "Party minutes, Mr. Martin." The Din didn't respond. He was still sitting on the couch, still staring at the mirror. The scotch bottle was unopened. He'd been tempted, but something stopped him. If he was going to do what Louis challenged him to do, he needed to be completely present, completely clear. But was he really going to do it? Was he really going to walk out on that stage and strip away the armor? What would that even look like? How do you sing pain when you've spent 20 years singing ease? Listen to this carefully, because this is the moment when Dean Martin made a decision that would change how he saw himself forever. He stood up, walked to the mirror, and spoke out loud to his own reflection. "You're not Dino Crocetti anymore, but you're not really Dean Martin either. You're somewhere in between, and you've been so scared of people seeing that middle ground that you became a ghost." At 8:15, Dean left his dressing room. He walked down the corridor toward the stage entrance, and as he turned the corner, he saw Louis Armstrong leaning against the wall, trumpet case at his feet. Louis looked up, met Dean's eyes, and nodded once. No words, just acknowledgement. Dean nodded back, and in that exchange, something passed between them. An understanding. Lewis wasn't trying to destroy Dean. He was trying to free him. The stage manager appeared. "Mr. Martin, you're on in 2 minutes." Dean walked to the wings. He could hear the crowd on the other side of the curtain. 600 people who'd paid to see Dean Martin do what Dean Martin always did. Make them smile, make them laugh, make them forget their troubles. But tonight, Louis Armstrong had asked him to do something different, to make them remember, to make them feel, to make them see. The house lights dimmed. The spotlight hit center stage. The announcer's voice came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen from Las Vegas, Nevada, please welcome the one and only Dean Martin." The curtain opened. Dean walked into the light. The applause was immediate, warm, welcoming. These people loved him before he even opened his mouth. That was the power of the persona, but it was also the prison. Dean stepped to the microphone and looked out at the audience. Front row center, he could see Louis Armstrong, sitting with his trumpet across his lap, watching, waiting. Dean had planned to open with "That's Amore," safe, crowd-pleasing, exactly what they expected. But as he stood there, feeling the weight of Louis' challenge, he heard himself say into the microphone, "Good evening, folks. Before we get started tonight, I want to try something different. I want to sing a song I don't usually perform. It's an old Italian song my father used to sing when I was a kid, back when my name was Dino Crocetti and we lived above a barber shop in Ohio." The audience went quiet. This wasn't the Dean Martin they expected. There were no jokes, no self-deprecating charm, no distance. This was something raw. Dean nodded to the pianist, who looked confused, but began playing a slow, melancholic melody. And then Dean began to sing Torna a Surriento in Italian, his father's language, the language he'd spent 20 years hiding. The first verse came out shaky. His voice cracked on the second line, but he kept going. And as he sang, something extraordinary happened. The mask began to fall away, not all at once, but piece by piece, note by note. The careful pronunciation gave way to the accent he'd buried. The smooth delivery gave way to something more urgent, more desperate, more real. He sang about returning home, about longing for a place you can never quite reach again, about being caught between two worlds and not fully belonging to either. And every word carried the weight of a lifetime of hiding. By the second verse, tears were streaming down Dean's face. He wasn't trying to cry. He wasn't performing emotion. It was just happening. 20 years of holding everything in, and Louis Armstrong had found the one question that broke through. "What's your pain?" This was his pain. The kid who changed his name, changed his voice, changed everything to be accepted, only to discover that acceptance meant disappearing. The immigrant son who made it in America, but lost himself in the process. The man who became so good at being Dean Martin that he forgot how to be Dino Crocetti. The audience sat in complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Nobody whispered. 600 people were witnessing something they'd never seen before. Dean Martin, without the armor, without the jokes, without any protection at all. When the song ended, Dean stood at the microphone, tears still on his face, breathing hard. For 5 full seconds, there was no sound. Then slowly, starting from the front row, people began to stand, not to applaud, just to stand. A silent acknowledgement of what they'd just witnessed. Louis Armstrong was the first one standing. He had tears on his face too. He brought his trumpet to his lips and played a single, clear note. Just one note, held long and pure. A response to Dean's song, a musical thank you. Then the applause came, but it was different from any applause Dean had ever received. It wasn't admiration for skill or appreciation for entertainment. It was recognition, human to human. These people had just seen him, really seen him, and they were saying, "We understand. We've been hiding too." Dean stepped back from the microphone, overwhelmed. He'd expected to feel exposed, vulnerable, weak, but instead, he felt lighter than he had in 20 years. Lewis was right. The style had been a lie. Not the voice, not the talent, but the distance, the refusal to let people see the pain. And in finally showing it, Dean had found something he'd been missing since 1940, the truth. Backstage after the show, Dean sat in his dressing room with the door open. He didn't want to be alone right now. He needed to be around people, to remember that vulnerability didn't destroy him. It connected him. Lewis appeared in the doorway. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at Dean, and Dean looked back. And in that look was everything that needed to be said. Finally, Lewis spoke. "You know what the difference is between a good singer and a great singer, Dean?" Dean shook his head. "A good singer makes you feel what they want you to feel. A great singer makes you feel what they actually feel. Tonight, you were great." Lewis stepped into the room. "And I know that wasn't easy. I know you've been protecting that kid from Steubenville for a long time. But brother, he don't need protecting anymore. He just needs to be seen." Dean's voice was rough when he spoke. "I've spent 20 years building Dean Martin. I don't know how to be Dino Crocetti anymore." "You don't gotta choose," Lewis said. "That's the thing nobody tells you about pain and identity. You don't gotta pick one or the other. You can be both. Dean Martin with all the talent and success and professionalism, but carrying Dino Crocetti's truth inside. That's what makes it real." They sat together for a while, two men who'd spent their lives performing, finally talking about the cost of that performance. Lewis told Dean about nights when the smile hurt to maintain, when playing the lovable Satchmo felt like suffocating, when he wanted to scream at the world, but knew he had to keep playing the trumpet and grinning, because that's what the audience expected from him. Dean told Lewis about the recurring dream he had, where he was back in Steubenville, and everybody was calling him Dino, and he didn't recognize himself in the mirror because his face had changed into someone else's. The fear that one day he'd forget entirely who he used to be. "But tonight," Dean said quietly. "I remembered." Lewis smiled. "And tomorrow, you'll remember again, and the day after that, until it becomes part of your act, not separate from it. That's when you'll be free, brother. When the truth and the performance are the same thing." They shook hands as Louis left, but it was more than a handshake. It was a promise to keep being real, to keep showing the pain alongside the polish, to stop hiding. Dean Martin flew back to Vegas on Friday morning as planned, but something fundamental had changed. In his next show at the Sands, he started introducing songs differently. Instead of jokes, he'd tell stories, real stories about his childhood, his father, his journey from Steubenville to Vegas. The audiences loved it, not because it was funnier or more entertaining, but because it was true. Years later, in 1973, Dean recorded an album that included several Italian songs. Critics called it his most emotionally honest work. Dean never publicly explained why he made it, but people close to him knew. It was a continuation of what started in Newport, a commitment to stop hiding Dino Crocetti and instead integrate him into Dean Martin. Lewis and Dean stayed in touch. They never performed together again, but they exchanged letters occasionally. In one letter from 1968, Lewis wrote, "You asked me once why I challenged you that night in Newport. Truth is, I saw myself in you. I spent years performing the version of myself the world wanted to see, holding back what I truly felt, because that was the only way they'd let me play, but I found ways to put the truth in the trumpet, in the growl of my voice. I wanted you to find your way to do that too. Looks like you did." The recording of Dean's performance that night in Newport was never officially released. It existed somewhere in a vault, a private moment captured on tape. but bootleg recordings circulated among musicians and serious fans. People talked about it in hushed tones. Have you heard the Newport tape? The night Dean Martin sang in Italian and cried on stage. What Louis Armstrong did that night wasn't cruel. It was necessary. He saw a man suffocating under his own success and offered him a way to breathe. The challenge wasn't prove you're tough enough to show pain. It was trust me enough to be human. And Dean, after 20 years of protection, finally accepted. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. The question Lewis asked Dean that day, "What's your pain?" is the same question every performer eventually faces. The same question every person faces when they've built a persona so strong it starts to replace who they really are. And the answer Dean gave, by walking onto that stage and singing in his father's language with tears on his face, was simple. My pain is forgetting who I was in order to become who you wanted me to be. That's the pain Lewis understood. That's the pain he challenged Dean to share. And that's the night two legends reminded each other, and 600 witnesses, that being real is harder than being perfect, but infinitely more valuable.